Hello, and welcome to Yes Chef! I'm your host, Lucille Orr-D'oeuvre, and today we're going to be making, such a lovely, delicious, best comfort food for on a day, say, a big snowstorm, when you've just come in from shoveling, and you're all wet and cold, and you just need to put something warm in your belly that isn't very complicated, but still very satisfying. Well, we'll be making the Croque Monsieur and other variations of it, which to many people in America might think it's a deluxe grilled cheese sandwich, which it sort of is. This is the French take. It was called such because croque means crunch, so it is very crunchy and crispy, and the monsieur means mister, and that it was made mostly for a businessman's luncheon at Parisian cafes back in the day. Now, with all of these different variations, the names really resemble the original form, because the variations don't stray too far, but with a dish like this, you can bring it to all sorts of places, and we'll get very detailed about all of the accessories that you can put on your croque monsieur. But for now, we can learn how to make the most delicious warm treat for your belly on a cold winter's day. The first things you're going to need, and really the only things you'll need, are four main ingredients. You'll need some bread, you'll need some butter, you'll need some cheese, and you'll need some ham. Now, there are so many different variations you can do just with these simple ingredients. Salted or unsalted butter. Do you want the regular kind from the grocery store, or that special hand-churned craft butter you bought at a food fair at one point? Decisions. Truffle butter? Garlic butter? The bread. Do you want rye or whole wheat? I personally always opt for delicious sourdough, but that's just my preference. There are many kinds of bread that you can use for your croque monsieur. Now, the cheeses is where this begins to get very complex. The different cheeses that you can put in a sandwich where the cheese will melt are almost endless. There are cheeses from every part of the world that would taste delicious in this wonderful food, but because it is a traditionally French recipe, a lot of the cheeses that go best are French. Now, a lot of them come from Western European countries as well, but a delicious, sheep's milk cheese from Greece, or a sharp American cheddar would still be very good. But for the stretchiness factor and how important that is in the enjoyability of consuming this sandwich, is a short list of very good cheeses. I will let you in on this short list right now. Now, To start off with, in third place, I would have to rate a delicious Italian provolone because it's super stretchy. But it has more flavor than a mozzarella has. Mozzarella on a cheese sandwich by itself would be just a little, I don't know, it would fall flat in a way. People would be looking for the jalapeno in their jalapeno popper and wouldn't find it. Provolone cheese has a much sharper flavor, and it has a nice nose about it too. And by what I mean by nose about it, it smells lovely when it's held right about your lips. Then what you smell while you're eating it is very enjoyable. But it is not a stinky cheese, so it won't make your breath terrible when you have to run back to work. That is the third place best cheese for a Croque Monsieur. The second place, and might I point out, this is purely my opinion. This is not rated by any sort of ISO 9002 standard, so to speak. But number 2 on my list for a Croque Monsieur cheese is a delicious Dutch Gouda, or even better, a smoked Gouda, because the stretchiness of it is just so satisfying, and unlike the provolone, it is a little bit tougher when it stretches, so you don't get quite so many small strings that kind of fall to the wayside. You kind of get all of the cheese with this style. But the smoked Gouda is especially good in the cold winter months when everything just needs to be curled up and cozy inside and your tummy just needs a warm snack. But the best number 1 cheese for a Croque Monsieur is definitely hands down and by no surprise, is one of the most common cheeses for it to be made in its original homeland of France. But the Comté cheese from the Comté region of France, which borders Switzerland, they know about cheese there. It is the stretchiest and tastiest cheese for the sandwich. It has just ever so slight bit of oil separation from the fats, so it just glistens, but only enough for aesthetic pleasure. It does not ruin the integrity of the cheese, it does not ruin the flavor, and it makes nothing soggy. Now for its flavor, it has a very nice, fairly mild, but definitely noticeable, pleasing earthy flavor, sort of like a portobello mushroom. Now, it also, the stretchiness of it will kind of come so thickly that you can actually easily snap it, which makes it much better when you're dining in front of company, say in a restaurant or a Parisian bistro. That is a lot of cheese talk, but I did work as a cheese specialist at one point in my colorful career past, but that's a story for another time. But I know my cheeses, you can bet on that. When it comes to the ham, there are a few different variations here, but not very many. We'll keep it simple. Typical, regular old stone-baked or honey-baked ham is really ideal for this. It slices to a nice thin consistency because you don't want to have to toughly chew into it. It's not a breakfast steak here. Alternatively, you could choose a lovely jamon serrano from Spain. Lovely, a much tougher type of ham, but just delicious the way it's cured. Now, that is for the just basic ingredients. See how many different variations you have just on that. But we're going to get a little bit later on to some very interesting alternative variations on this croque sandwich. But one thing I will point out before that is that the butter is imperative that when you use it, it be at room temperature. Now, don't try to cut corners by melting the butter in any fashion, because then it separates, and it never works out. The oil soaks into the bread, while the fat just stays in a glob in one spot. Your bread burns. It's just terrible. Don't do it. Don't cut the corners when you're in the kitchen. It is best to put the butter out at least 2 hours before you make the sandwich, and then you'll have an easy time spreading the butter all over. Otherwise, you'll end up with burnt bread. So the first thing you'll do, obviously, to make a sandwich, you'll take 2 slices of the bread, and before you butter it, you will sandwich a few slices of your cheese and 1 or 2 slices of ham as a traditional sandwich. But then you butter, and you butter the whole thing together as if you are frosting a cake. You butter the top, you butter the bottom, and you butter the crusts. It is important you don't forget the crusts, because they are the first part to burn and dry out and get all sort of charcoaly and sandy grit all over your sandwich, and it's just not so good. Easy way to keep that from happening is to make sure you don't forget to butter the crust. The best way to keep your butter, though, if you are like me and you occasionally forget to do things like put the butter out 2 hours before lunchtime, then you should look into the miracle of ways to store your butter in a French butter bell. Now, these are a very interesting contraption that is so very simple that industrial designers probably scratch their heads as to how it can be so effective when it's only one material in 2 pieces. It's really just so simple. You get 2 pieces. The top part has a bell-shaped cup on the inside of it, and the other piece is a basin that acts sort of as a crock. Now, it should be porcelain or china, something of that sort, a sturdy, heavy, good porcelain. All you have to do is get your butter at room temperature to begin with, and then smear a bunch in the center of the bell. You fill the basin with 1/3 of it with a salty water solution. Just pour in some warm water and a bunch of salt. You don't need to even measure it, just eyeball it. It's fine. The water blocks out the air. It traps the air away from the butter so it does not discolor, does not dry out, and it does not age the bacteria in the butter, making it spoil faster. Now, eventually the butter in here will spoil, just as the butter in the fridge eventually will spoil. Butter does not last forever, even though it does last a lot longer than most of the other ingredients in your kitchen. The salt is in the water because if you do not use a salted butter, if you are like me and you use an unsalted butter, then the salt in the water will help to keep the bacteria in the butter keeps it from misbehaving, because the salt will make the saline solution sterile so that bacteria cannot grow. When you do not salt the water, you will very shortly be seeing little sort of pink fuzzy strings floating around in the water. As soon as you see anything pink in your butter bell, you must scoop everything into the garbage and wash it in hot water and start with a new bunch of butter, because pink means that there is a fungus or mold bacterial infection in your butter. And because butter is a soft consistency, it can swim right through there, so don't even bother trying to keep the rest. Now, the point of the butter bell is that you keep a little bit of your butter at room temperature at all times. You will always have butter for your bagel in the morning or your sandwich in the afternoon. Little things like that. It is not really meant for storing a month's worth of butter at room temperature. That is ill-advised. I would only put enough butter in my butter bell for about 3 to 5 days. I use it up in that time, and then I put fresh stuff in again. I change the water about once a week as well, just to make sure that everything is nice and clean. But the butter bell is hands down the best way to store the butter that you will need for buttering your Croque Monsieur. Now here you see a lovely finished product after it has been grilled, and there are a number of ways to grill it. We're getting to it. But this sandwich can take many different forms, and this Croque Monsieur you see right now may not be what yours looks like in the end, because perhaps you decided to opt for something else, and we will get to that. But for grilling, the way I will recommend, I will tell you all in great detail momentarily. But there are ways you can do in a panini press on medium for a few minutes. Really not so bad. I won't tell you how long it takes, because I feel you should be monitoring your panini press, never leaving it unattended. And you'll notice once the cheese melts to be the right gooiness level, that's when it's time to take it off the press. Or a lot of people will fry it in a pan. I know that is the most common way to make a grilled cheese. For most recipes that I find online, mostly American authors, mostly made in a frying pan with butter and or oil, and you just turn the burner up high and grill the heck out of it. I find when I use that method, I end up with a charcoal briquette with a little bit of cheese in the middle, and I do not enjoy that. Maybe some people do, and hey, go for it. But for me, I like to taste my Croque Monsieur as the sandwich it is intended to be, not a reincarnation of last year's campfire when I went out on a camping trip. I prefer to make mine the way that I was shown by my mother, and she was shown by hers, under the broiler in the oven. If you have an oven, you have the implement to make your Croque Monsieur, your very fancy French lunch that you can impress your friends, or perhaps a date with. French food always impresses because it sounds so much fancier than it really is. But you don't need panini press, you don't need a fancy pan, you don't need fancy anything. Just a plain old oven should work, as long as it is in good working condition, and has a broiler on the top. I just mean nothing fancy as a broiler, like an add-on on top of your oven and stove. No, just the upper burner of your oven. It will say broil on your oven dial or your oven settings, and that is the upper burner. All you need is the heat to come down from the top instead of the traditional up from the bottom. You put it in. I always put it on a piece of parchment paper on a baking sheet because I don't want the cheese to be dripping all over my oven when it gets gooey. And I pop it in the oven on broil, which is about 500 degrees Fahrenheit, so be very careful and always use oven mitts. And you must watch it. Now, this is the best trick of your Croque Monsieur, especially for parents of small children. Young children love to be a help in the kitchen whenever they can because it makes them feel like they're growing up. And every kid likes that. So you just have to ask them, if you turn on the light in your oven, that they watch the sandwich as it goes. And if you do not have children at home to help you with this, that's fine too. Don't look at it as having to wait in front of your oven and watch for 2 whole minutes. Think of it as a moment for breathing space. Reflect on your day so far. Think about ways that you can make the rest of your day go even better. And take some deep breaths. And as soon as you see that the bread that is covered with butter is totally bubbling all over, not just on one side, not just, a little patch over there is starting to go not ready yet. It must be bubbling over the whole surface of that top slice of bread. And then it is ready to be carefully pulled out of the oven and flipped over. I prefer with a flipper or a spatula of some sort, but you can just use a fork and knife as well. Again, wear oven mitts. Please do be careful. Now, while you're flipping, this is a point where you must add all kinds of things. Namely, for the Croque Monsieur, another slice of cheese on what is now the top of the sandwich, which had just previously been the bottom earlier, before we flipped it. If you wish to do it up, this is the point where you will add all of your other things, which we will discuss shortly. And then you pop it back in the oven on broil and watch very closely because this time it's already hot. And it's not going to take nearly as long to cook this side, so be sure to be watching it carefully or you'll burn the whole thing. And as soon again as you see it bubbling all over, the cheese is dripping down the side. Oh, and the butter is bubbling all over the crust. Oh my, so delicious. It's ready to come out and almost ready to go in your tummy. Be sure to turn off the oven because if you're forgetful like me, sometimes you might forget that and end up hitting your kitchen all afternoon. Don't do that. Now, some of the variations we have. The most classic of Croque Monsieur variations is the fried egg Croque Madame. Now it is called the Croque Madame just like Mrs. T was made after people said Mr. Coffee was sexist. So hey, Croque Monsieur everywhere was quite popular in its day. Seemed a bit sexist. What about the women? It's not just men who go to work anymore. So someone had the bright idea to make a Croque Madame. Now, not necessarily to appeal to the tastes of female diners at the time and place where it was invented, but more because it has a fried, sunny-side-up egg on top of it, which looks like a lady's chapeau, a broad-brimmed hat that was quite fashionable at the time. So, there it looks like a Croque Monsieur is wearing a lady's hat, so it is called the Croque Madame. Now, women who were going out and eating lunch were complaining, hey, this doesn't really make sense. Greasy, heavy sandwich gets even greasier and heavier. That doesn't really appeal to my taste. So someone then again came up with the Croque Mademoiselle. Mademoiselle, of course, means miss. Madame means Mrs. So the Croque Mademoiselle was seen to be more of a feminine version of the sandwich, although I prefer my croque to be non-binary, personally. But we're getting off topic. Back to the sandwiches. The Croque Mademoiselle involves chives, cucumber, and lettuce, almost as though you're shoving a salad into your grilled cheese sandwich. Imagine that. 2 courses in one. It really is quite delicious, especially if you use garlic butter. There are many other world variations on the Croque Monsieur. It was certainly an international hit. As we know, in America and Canada, the grilled cheese is beloved by people of all cultures. It is a comfort food you just can't get enough of. Unless you're lactose intolerant. But then you can get a non-dairy cheese, but that's another story. The Croque Monsieur, when it became more fashionable in the south of France, they like to add tomatoes and sun-dried tomatoes to things. So when you add a tomato into your Croque Monsieur, you now have a Croque Provençal from the region of Provence. A lovely dish. I do not know anyone who does not enjoy the combination of a grilled cheese sandwich and anything tomato-based, whether that be a tomato in your grilled cheese, whether you dip your grilled cheese in ketchup, or whether you have a tomato soup along with your grilled cheese. It is a favorite of pretty much everyone I've ever spoken to about cheese. If you go to the South Pacific, you can add some pineapple to your Croque Monsieur, and basically the same thing that a Hawaiian pizza does. It goes into sandwich form, and you get a Croque Hawaiian. Oh, it's delicious. I personally adore pineapple and ham together, and those who poo-poo it, I think, just aren't brave enough to try it themselves. Or, if you wish for your wintry warm treat of a Croque Monsieur to have a more Nordic feel to it, you can substitute the ham for smoked salmon for a Croque Norwegian, from Norway, of course. So those are just a few of the variations that you can make, but there are also other kinds of Croque Monsieur variations from around the world. As I've mentioned, the grilled cheese here in Canada and down in America is very common and popular. But down in Chile, they have a variation known as the Barros Harpa, which has a variety of different types of cheeses and meats. And then the Portuguese, they have a version that they call a Francesinha, which It means it's from France, basically, and it is the same type of sandwich, but it has a steak, sausage, and ham in it, and is covered with a beer sauce. That sounds interesting. If I ever make it over to Portugal, I know what I'm ordering for my first luncheon. There is also a very common variation to the Croque Monsieur, which does not variate its name, but it is served with bechamel sauce poured over top of it, along with the cheese, for an extra rich affair, which definitely calls for a fork and knife. Now, the Croque Monsieur has been around for a long time, and all of its variations, but the thing that is most important about the Croque Monsieur is not what gender it is not what toppings you put on it. The most important thing about the Croque Monsieur is that it is crunchy. So be sure you keep an eye on it while it is cooking, whether you involve your little Kinder in the kitchen with you or not. Maybe it's just you. That's fine. Again, take that moment to breathe. Take that moment to breathe. And you'll be rewarded with delightful results that you'll want to repeat again and again and again. Try it with all the different variations and see which one you like best. Start a club, a Croque Monsieur club, a group of people who gather once a week to try a different type of Croque Monsieur. Who knows? The variations on the variations on the variations are almost endless. Have fun with it and enjoy. Here for Yes Chef, I'm your host, Lucille Orr-D'oeuvre. Have a lovely evening. Bye-bye.